Hello everyone and welcome back. In today's video, we've got another season preview video. We've done a handful of these. We are halfway done. Today we're looking at two more Atlantic Division teams, the Ontario teams. Look at how these two teams did last year and how they're shaping up going into next year. We're to all the updates regarding these two teams coming up right now. Hello everyone, welcome back to another video here at the End-to-End Hockey channel. Now before we get started, don't forget to like this video and subscribe below. Thank you for all of your support. I would never be able to do without you guys. So if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe button down below. Don't forget to leave a comment. We're on the road to 1,000 subscribers. And don't forget to stay tuned for more videos coming out in the very near future. Sorry for the delay and disparity in posting over the past couple of weeks. I've been quite busy. I'm going to try now that September's here, that we're getting closer to the hockey season, to start posting regularly and not so far apart within postings. So just keep an eye out. The season preview videos, which will only be for the next 3 weeks because we're already halfway done, will hopefully be posted on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. I'm taking this video as of Monday. This one might come out on Tuesday because I am recording this quite late. But just to keep in mind, season preview videos, if you want to check in on them, if you haven't already, check in on the other ones that we've already posted. We've posted 8 so far, but if you want to check on the ones that are coming up in the future, they should be posted on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. So stay tuned for that. But in today's video, we've got the Ottawa Senators and the Toronto Maple Leafs. We're now leapfrogging over the halfway point of the season preview series. So we're going with the 5th and 6th teams in the Atlantic Division. That's the Sens and the Maple Leafs. So as per usual in these season preview videos, we'll look at how they did last year. We'll look at their offseason additions, their subtractions, the trades that these two teams made in the offseason, as well as their top 3 draft picks from 2025. The 5 things that I said in the offseason preview they should do in the offseason to get better. And on top of all of that, I'll give you my predictions for their lineup, their 2025-2026 point total, and my off-season grade. So we're going to start with Toronto Maple Leafs here today. The Maple Leafs had a fantastic season last year. It was the first time in their franchise history they had won the newly created Atlantic Division that was created all the way back in 2013. Surprisingly, with how dominant of a regular season team they've been so far, they had yet to win an Atlantic Division title, but that changed last year. They had a record of 52-26-4 for 108 points, first in the Atlantic, second in the Eastern Conference, 4th best record in the entire NHL. So it was a dominant season from Toronto, both on the offensive side, defensive side. You can see that in their goals for and goals against. They had 267 goals for in the regular season, 229 goals against. So they were a plus 38, like we said, not one of the best we've seen, like not to Vegas Tampa levels, but it's a really solid plus minus differential there for Toronto. And for the first time in their franchise history, won the Atlantic. So very good stuff there. If you go over to their goal and point scoring leaders from the regular season last year, Marner led the team in points with 102, so a triple-digit hitter for Mitch Marner. He was followed by William Nylander, who had 84, and Austin Matthews, who had 78. So 3 of the core 4 wound up leading the team in points. Not surprising there. Goal scoring wise, William Nylander once again hit the 40-goal plateau, hitting 45 goals. John Tavares had 38, and Austin Matthews, while he was a little bit injured, definitely had a down year last year, only hitting 33. Once again, 3 of the 4 core 4 members were leading the team in goal scoring, so not too surprising there. So this team made it, as we just talked about, as the first team in the Atlantic. They wound up beating the Ottawa Senators in 6 games. So the Sens, who were the wildcard 1 team, wound up falling to the Toronto Maple Leafs. And then the Leafs did have a 2-0 lead over the eventual Stanley Cup champion Florida Panthers, but gave it up, got blown out in Game 7, lost that series in 7 to Florida. So it was definitely not a very good end to the season, but they did get the closest that this core group has been to a conference final appearance in the past 10 years. So very interesting note there. If you look at their points scoring and goal scoring leaders in the postseason, Nylander led the team with 15 points. Marner was second with 13. And then Nylander had 6 goals leading the team, with Tavares and Nice having 5. So once again, another solid performance there in the playoffs from Nylander. Once again, Marner had some points, but towards the end of those series, he really sort of started to tail off. On top of that, Tavares, Nice, I really like Nice and how he's played the last couple of years in the playoffs. So once again, bright spots from the Maple Leafs. Got very close to a conference conference final appearance, but it was not enough there for the Toronto Maple Leafs, so very interesting note there. Next, going over to their offseason additions and losses. So there's actually quite a long list here for the Maple Leafs. In the offseason, they added Maccelli from Utah, Nick Waugh from Vegas, Dakota Joshua from Vancouver, all in trades, and then Michael Pezzetta from Montreal, Travis Boyd from Minnesota, Benoit Olivier Giroux from NYR, and Vinny Lettieri from Boston, all in free agency, and then traded for Henry Thrun from San Jose on the blue line. Meanwhile, their subtractions, they lost Mitch Marner in a trade to Vegas, Max Pacioretty, who's UFA, Ryan Reeves to San Jose in a trade, Nick Abruzzese to Tampa, Alex Steves to Boston, Pontus Holmberg to Tampa, Alex Nylander and Jani Hakanpää, who are both UFAs, all in free agency. They also lost Matt Murray in free agency to Seattle. They lost a 2027 third round pick and 2028 fourth round pick, both Toronto. So if you look at this team, if you break it all down, they do lose a little bit of goalie depth with Matt Murray, but I think they have full confidence that Dennis Hildeby can be the third stringer this upcoming season. So all in all, it's not too bad. Defensive wise, only made one move. I mean, they added Henry Thrun, who I think could be a solid 6-7 defenseman for the Maple Leafs. Lost Jani Hakanpää, who was out for a long time last year due to injuries. So once again, it's not an overly bad swap. And then on top of that, their forward group got a major overhaul, especially in the depth. Depth-wise, they lost Abruzzese, Steves, Holmberg, Nylander, and they got Pezzetta, Boyd, Giroux, and Lettieri. So once again, sort of like in and out. Like they got a little bit older on the depth charts, but it's not an overly bad swap. They also lost Mitch Marner, who was their point leader, was never going to be brought back. They at least got something for him in a trade, so that was very good. They also lost Max Pacioretty and Ryan Reeves, who were Saul Bomb 6 forwards last year. And then in exchange, the bigger additions on the forward group were Maccelli, Nick Waugh, and Dakota Joshua, who have all shown in the past they can be very solid middle six forwards who can put up between like 40 and maybe as a ceiling like 60 points. So like those are some really solid adds. Like I think even though they do lose Marner, I think the Maple Leafs team actually got a bit better on the forward group, even though they got a little bit older on their depth. And I do think the Thrun addition's really good on the blue line. Losing Matt Murray is a little bit of a blow, especially losing some draft picks, but I think that forward group, even though it doesn't have Marner's talents anymore, is a slight bit better with the sort of core groups they got with Dakota Joshua, Nick Waugh, and Maccelli. So very interesting note there. Those are their additions and subtractions from this past offseason. The Toronto Maple Leafs made 4 trades this offseason. They traded a 2027 third round pick to Utah for Maccelli, traded Mitch Marner in a sign trade to Vegas for Nick Waugh, traded a 2028 fourth round pick to Vancouver for Dakota Joshua, and traded Ryan Reeves to San Jose for Henry Thrun. So all in all, some really solid trades there from the Maple Leafs. I really do like the Joshua one. Even though it was trading Marner, I do like the addition of Nick Waugh. I think Maccelli can fit in really well in the top 6 role. So I do like some of those trades that the Toronto Maple Leafs made. Next, going over to their top 3 draft selections in the 2025 draft. So their first draft selection in 2025 draft was the 64th overall pick in the second round, and they took center Cobbler. Cobbler, I think, eventually could challenge for like a third line center role in a couple of years' time. Then 22 picks later, at pick 86 in the third round, they also took a center prospect, and that was Hopkins. Once again, solid center prospect who I think eventually down the road could challenge for like a 4th or third line role on the center group. And then in the 5th round, 137th overall, they took right winger Bell, who I think eventually could challenge for like a middle 6 role for the Toronto Maple Leafs in time. So the Leafs didn't have too much draft capital, but I do think they made some decent pickups with the few draft picks they did have, and they definitely targeted trying to add some more forward help in the draft. So very interesting note there. Next, going over to my offseason checklist. So my offseason preview video for the Leafs, I mentioned 5 things this Leafs team needed to do this offseason to get better and improve for the upcoming season. The first thing I said was to remake the top 6. They did that. They moved off of Mitch Marner. As much as he was a really solid regular season performer, wasn't the greatest in the postseason. They just want to really change up the mix. So they move off of Marner, they add Waugh, they add Maccelli, they add Joshua. Maybe they can add a guy like Easton Cowan into the top 6. Like I think they're going to have a completely remade top 6 with, of course, Matthews, Nyes, Nylander, and Tavares still being in there. And I think it's probably going to be for the better for the Maple Leafs. So they did remake the top 6, did move off of Marner. That's check number 1 on my checklist. The second thing I said this team to do in the offseason preview video was to extend Matthew Nyes. And they did that. It was a really great, I think it was what, 6-year deal, just over $7 million. Like that deal is going to age like fine wine for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Nyes needed to be locked up on a longer term deal with the way he was playing over the past couple of years, and they did did that. So that's a second check on my checklist. The third thing I said this team should do is to consider moving out some of their overpriced bottom six forwards, such as guys like Jarnkrok, McMahon, and Robertson. Now, guys like Jarnkrok, Kampf, and Robertson have been mentioned heavily in the trade rumor mill by the Toronto Maple Leafs, and there's still a possibility they could try and trade them. But at this current point in time, none of those guys have been moved, so that's an X on my checklist. The fourth thing I said this team should do was to give some of the younger guys more playing time, such as Hirvonen, Niemela, and Cowan. Now, Hirvonen and Niemela both are still unsigned RFAs, but I definitely think that we'll get some of the younger guys more involved this upcoming season. I'm not sure about the blue line because they have a pretty stacked blue line, but I think a guy like Easton Cowan and maybe one or two other younger guys could definitely challenge in training camp for an NHL roster spot. So I'm going to say to some extent that's a check mark on the checklist because they do have some spots open. And the fifth thing I said on my checklist was to add some bottom six help, and this team did that. Like, I'm not sure if Joshua, Waugh, and Maccelli are going to be for sure top six, top nine forwards. At bare minimum, they're going to be solid bottom six forwards, and I think that really does strengthen it. They also brought on guys like Boyd or like Terry, who can also be solid like fourth line spare guys who can also fill out the bottom six. So they definitely got some bottom six help, and that's a check mark off the checklist. So all in all, they at least completed 3 or 4 things, depending on how you look at it, of my checklist. The only thing they really didn't complete is adding some more cap space, moving guys like Jarnkrok or McMahon or Kampf. So very interesting note there. Next, going over to my projected lineup for the Toronto Maple Leafs for the 2025-2026 season. So at this current point in time, here's my projected lineup for the Maple Leafs as it sits right now. So as it sits right now, my top line will be Matthew Nyes with Austin Matthews and Easton Cowan. Second line will be Maccelli with Tavares and Nylander. Third line will be Joshua with Domi and Waugh. And the fourth line will be Robertson with Lawton and Laurence. The D pairs will be McCabe with Tanev, Riley with Carlo, Benoit with OEL. Then you have Stolarz as a starter, Wool as the backup, and you have McMahon, Jarnkrok, and Myers as the 3 spares. And I think that would be a lethal roster. Like, that's very deep. You're not even including guys who would have to be placed on waivers on the forward group. Defensive wise, still a really solid team. Like, that's a really solid forward group there for the Maple Leafs. Next, going over to my predictions for the Toronto Maple Leafs for this upcoming 2025-2026 season. Now, I think they're going to take a tiny step back, even though I do think the forward group got a little bit better. Losing a guy like Marner is going to be a really bad blow for the Leafs, and I do think after winning the Atlantic Division last year, they're poised to take a tiny bit of a step back. I have them finishing with a record of 49, 29, and 4 for 102 points, third in the Atlantic Division. So I have them getting surpassed by a couple of teams, but still being a top 3 team in the Atlantic, still hitting the triple-digit points. They're not going to fall off too much. I have them being lower by like 6 points, but I just definitely think they're not going to repeat as the Atlantic champions this upcoming season. So that is my predictions for the Toronto Maple Leafs for the 2025-2026 season. And lastly, going over to my off-season grades. So I feel like the off-season the Maple Leafs had, I think it's a pretty good off-season. Like, they moved off of Marner, who needed a fresh start. They were able to add some more pieces who sort of rounded the top 6, top 9, like Maccelli, like Joshua, like Waugh. I think those are all going to be really good pieces. They had some solid depth. Thrunn's going to be a solid piece. Didn't lose too much off of their roster from last year. So I'm going to give them a B+. Like, I don't think they had an A-level rating off-season, especially moving Marner. But I definitely do think this team had a very fantastic offseason, used the added cap space from Marner to good use, and I do think this team is going to be pretty good this upcoming season. So that's my offseason grade and opinions for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Next, going over to the Ottawa Senators. So last year, the Ottawa Senators, my second favorite team besides these guys, finally made the playoffs, ending like what, a 7 or 8 year playoff drought to make it into the playoffs. Finished with a record last year of 45, 30, and 7 for 97 points, 4th in the Atlantic, 6th in the East, 12th in the NHL, and they wound up making it as a wild card team. We're only 3 points away from hitting the triple digit mark. So last year was a fantastic season from the Senators. Could have been better, yes, but at least they made the playoffs. They had 242 goals for, 232 goals against, so they were plus 10 rating. Once again, not the worst in the world. Montreal made it with minus 18, so they weren't that bad, but once again, it wasn't the greatest of plus minuses either on their goal scoring, goals against wise, so very interesting note there. Going over to the goal scoring and point scoring leaders in the regular season for the Senators. So point wise, Tim Stützle of the team with 79 points, followed by Batherson who had 68 and Sanderson who had 57, while Kachuk led the team with 29 goals. Batherson was second with 26 and Stützle had had 24. So once again, it's not an atrocious point total and goal total. Like Stützle was almost a point per game, almost hit 82 points. Batherson hit 60 plus, which was a really good stuff there from the Senators, but they didn't have a 30 plus goal scorer, only had 2 guys who hit the 60 point total. Like you can see why they weren't one of the better goal scoring teams in the entire NHL last year. So very interesting note there. As we just talked about with the Toronto Maple Leafs, the Sens as a wildcard team got the Maple Leafs in round 1 and lost to Maple Leafs in 6 games. Now even after going down 3-0, they wound up staying alive longer than every other Eastern Conference team in round 1. So the Sens can hold their heads high given they're able to give the Leafs quite a good run for their money, but still it was a first round exit for the Southerners last offseason and the postseason. So looking at their goal scoring and point scoring leaders in the postseason, Tkachuk led the team with 4 goals, followed by Perron and Stützle, who were tied for second with 2, and then Tkachuk led the team with 7 points, followed by Giroux and Stützle, who were tied for second with 5. So once again, Tkachuk absolutely had fantastic playoffs, his first playoffs in his NHL career. Stützle also looked really good in his first ever playoffs. So once again, Ottawa was a very young team, and they didn't have a lot of playoff experience, so even though they did lose in round 1, the experience was invaluable for Ottawa. So very interesting note there. Next, going over to the offseason additions and subtractions. So if you look at this team in the offseason, not a whole bunch of movements. They added Lars Eller from Washington, Arthur Kailyev from NYR, Ollie Lykesell from Philly, all in free agency. They added Jordan Spence from LA in a trade, and Hunter Shepard from Washington in free agency. Well, they lost Matthew Heimer to NYI, Adam Gaudette to San Jose, Crookshanks to New Jersey, Reinhart to Vegas, Hamonic to Detroit, Gilbert to Philadelphia, Roos to UFA status, Forsberg to Los Angeles, all in free agency. And then they also lost a 2025 third round pick, which was Nashville's, and a 2026 sixth round pick, which was Colorado's, in the Spence deal. So all in all, if you look at this team, not overly bad offseason. Like Forsberg was a decent backup last year for the Senators, but Marilyn is now the goalie of the future. He's definitely a team's current backup, so they didn't need Forsberg anymore. Shepard can be a solid third, fourth stringer with a guy like Matt Sogard, so that's not a bad swap there. They lose Roos, they lose Gilbert, they lose Hamonic. Gilbert was a deadline acquisition, didn't play a whole bunch for Ottawa. Hamonic, towards the end of the season, really sort of lost his spot on the defensive pair in Ottawa. Roos was an AHL level guy. They lose all of those guys. They add Jordan Spence, who was a young up-and-coming defenseman, had a really good season last year in Los Angeles, could potentially eventually be a top 4 right-shot defenseman. So defensive-wise, definitely got better. Forward group-wise, did lose a little bit of depth. They lost Reinhart, Crookshank, Gaudette, who had a really good season last year in Ottawa, as well as Matthew Highmore. They had Lykesell to add some AHL depth, and then Kailyev and Eller, who I think at most can probably be like 4th line guys, spare forwards for the Senators. So just some swapping when it comes to some depth pieces on the Senators group. So not a whole bunch of change, but I definitely do like the change that they made. So very interesting note there. The Senators made one trade this offseason involving players, and that was Jordan Spence, still getting Spence from the Los Angeles Kings in exchange for a 2025 third and 2026 sixth round pick. So that was a really beautiful piece of work there from the Senators to get Spence for that low of an ask. So very interesting note there. Next, going over to the top 3 draft picks in the 2025 draft for the Ottawa Senators. So their first pick was in the first round, 23rd overall, and they used it to select right shot defenseman Logan Hensler. Actually traded down and were still able to get Hensler. Really stellar pickup here for Ottawa. I think Hensler long term has the potential to be the top 4, if not top pair right shot defenseman for the Ottawa Senators. So that was a really solid pickup. Third round, 93rd overall, they took right winger Vanek, and 4th round, 97th overall, they took goaltender Beckman. So I had a couple of really close picks in the 3rd and 4th round and took a goaltender and right winger. So once again, they didn't have too many draft picks. They were able to make the playoffs this year, but I think they really hit home on a couple of them, including getting Hensler in the first round. Like that was a stellar pickup here for Ottawa. So some really solid drafting there from the Sens. Next, going over to my offseason checklist for the Ottawa Senators. So back in the Ottawa Senators offseason preview, I said 5 things the Senators team should do in the offseason to get better and improve for next year. So the first one was to add a top 6 scorer. Now they didn't do this, so I was hoping they would go after a guy like Besser or a guy like Ehlers, find some way to finagle the cap, try and make it work. They weren't able to do so. Like I don't think they were in desperate need of a top 6 winger, but I think it definitely would have helped them going into this upcoming season. So they didn't do that. That's an X on the checklist because they did not add a top 6 winger. The second thing I said this team should do was to add a defensive-minded right shot top four defenseman. Now, I think it depends on your view of Jordan Spence. If you view Spence, at least at this point or potentially in the future, as a top four right shot defenseman, I think they completed that priority. But if they don't, then don't complete that priority. So I think completing that sort of a thing on the checklist really does depend on your views of Spence, but I definitely think Spence can be a top four right shot defenseman, so I'm going to give them a check there. The third thing I said this team should do is to give some of the younger guys some opportunities. Holiday, Hamara, Yakimchuk, Merolainen. I said they should all get some opportunities. I think Yakimchuk for sure will have a shot to make the defensive pairs for the Senators, especially if Nick Jensen starts the season on injury reserve. Holiday, I think, could definitely have a shot, or a couple of those other younger forwards if they don't really feel like some of those other newly acquired players really fit in their bottom six. And I definitely think Merolainen is going to be the backup. So I don't think to the full extent the Ottawa Senators are going to have a whole bunch of younger players on the roster, but they're going to have a couple. So I think to some extent they did complete that priority. The fourth thing I said this team should do was to extend Shane Pinto, and they have not done that yet. There's still a possibility in a couple of weeks' time, maybe before the start of the season, they do extend Shane Pinto, but at this current point in time, they have not yet extended Shane Pinto, so that's another X on the checklist. And the fifth thing I said this team should do was to move Perron or Batherson to free up some cap space to go after one of those top six upgrades. Didn't do that. Perron and Batherson are still on the Senators roster. I think both of them can be top 9 forwards, so maybe it's not the worst thing in the world that they didn't move them, but I did want them to free up a little bit more cap space, so that's another X on the checklist. So all in all, did a couple of things I said they should do in the offseason preview video, but not a whole bunch, so very interesting note there for Ottawa. Next, going over to my projected lineup for the Senators for 2025-2026 season. So at this current point in time, my projected lineup for the Sens is as follows. On the top line, I'd have Tkachuk with Stützle and Giroux. The second line would be Zetterlund with Cozens and Batherson. The third line would be Gregg with Pinto and Amadio. And the fourth line, Perron with Eller and Kailyev. I have Sanderson and Zub on the top pair, Chabot and Jensen on the second pair, and Kailyev and Spence on the third pair. Ullmark being the starter, Merolainen being the backup, and Cousins, Jenik, and Martin Paulo being the three spares. That would not only be a really good roster, it would be a cap compliant roster, and it's a very, very deep roster. Like, I think Ottawa has a really deep defensive core, has a really solid forward group. Like, this Ottawa Senators team is looking good entering the 2025-2026 season. So very good stuff there. Next, going over to my predictions for the Ottawa Senators for the upcoming season. Now, I have the Senators doing a slight bit better than they did this past year. Like this past year, 97 points, first wildcard spot, first playoff berth in 7 years. I think they're going to sort of replicate that to some extent. I have them finishing with a record of 45-28-9 for 99 points and still be in the first wildcard in the Eastern Conference. So I don't think they're going to be enough improved to squeak into the top 3 this year. Like I've predicted them to be in the top 3 the past couple of seasons. That hasn't happened. So I think they're going to stake as the first wildcard team, ever so slightly miss the triple digit mark. Wouldn't be one bit surprised if they were close to a top 3 spot in the Atlantic, but I just feel like even though they did improve a little bit, they didn't improve a whole bunch. So I definitely think this team's still in the sort of make the playoffs, but not be a top 3 team in the Atlantic. So very interesting note there. And lastly, going over to my offseason grades for the Ottawa Senators. So once again, if you look at what they did this offseason, goaltending wise, they lost Forsberg, but they're going to have Merolainen this upcoming season. Also a little bit of defensive depth, but the Jordan Spence ad is going to be massive for them. And once again, the forward group wise, just swapped out a couple of fourth liners, like they lose Gaudette, lose Highmore, add Kailyev and Eller. So all in all, I think they did all right this offseason. I'm going to give them a B- rating. Like I think they had a pretty solid offseason. Once again, if they had added a top 6 forward or established top 4 defenseman, I will have definitely put them in an A-level grade. But I definitely do think with the moves that they made this year, the minimal moves, not a whole bunch of movement, I think a B- rating is warranted for how they did this offseason. So that's my opinion on the Ottawa Senators, on the Toronto Maple Leafs. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts. Do you think that Toronto's poised to take a tiny bit of a step back but remain in the top 3 spot in the Atlantic? Is Ottawa poised to once again make the playoffs? Do you agree with those takes? Do you disagree with those takes? And I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on all of the stuff that was discussed in this video. That's all I'm going to talk for today. We're going to like this video, and if you're ready to subscribe below, thank you for all of your support. I would never be able to with all of you guys, so if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe button down below. Don't forget to leave a comment. We're on the road to 1,000 subscribers. Don't forget to stay tuned for more videos coming out in the very near future. I also have a blog talking about news, rumors, analysis, stuff like that, so check that out. I'll link that down in the description below. Can't wait to see you guys all for the next video. See you guys soon.